Hello, friends. I am so glad you stopped by my YouTube channel. Today, I want to share an interview I did with my good friend Michelle Shackelford. In this video, she shares what led her to ministry and how her passion for yoga has helped her in her faith. I hope that her testimony and her words bring you encouragement today. One quick note, I will go ahead and apologize if there are a few awkward transitions. There were some interruptions, especially with Wi-Fi, but that certainly didn't stop us from having a good time talking with one another. So without further ado, here's my interview with Michelle Shackelford. All right, we are here with Michelle Shackelford. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce to our viewers who you are, what your passions are, that sort of thing?
Sure. I am Michelle, and I have my my ultimate passions in life are my dog and my cat. Joy is my dog; she's precious, and Kitty is my cat, and she's precious and crazy. So those are my ultimate passions. But I am a. It's almost been a year since I've been graduated from Truett Seminary, which is super duper weird that it's almost a year because it feels like forever, and it also feels like just yesterday. And so, but I still get to remain plugged into the community of Truett Seminary as I am a covenant group leader, which is the title of the group is kind of always in flux, it seems, because now it's called spiritual formation something, but in my day it was called covenant group, so that's what I always call it. But anyway, so I get to plug in with some young ministers there, and that's super fun. And then by day I am a yoga instructor, and I manage a yoga studio, actually 2 yoga studios, in Waco, Texas. And so, and that is currently my primary job, is the yoga piece. And I also get to combine the practice of following Jesus with the practice of yoga, and that's super fun. So my ministry piece still plays in, even though I'm in what some would consider a secular work environment.
Very cool. And I will say that, in case the viewers don't know, I am in your covenant group.
Yeah!
That is, so you are an absolute joy to be around.
Well, thanks.
And yeah, so what led your desire to pursue ministry, and how exactly did you wind up at Truett?
That is a very long story, a very, very long story, but I'll just give you the highlights. So I was raised in church, and I remember as a small child preaching sermons in my head, and I didn't call it that, of course, because I was raised in a very, very Southern Baptist family and church, and women preaching or even women in ministry was not a thing. Like, it was not even a question. It's just not a thing. And so I didn't know what I was doing really, but I would just find myself like preaching these sermons in my head and kind of playing with sermon illustrations from everyday life examples. And let's see, what's the next highlight, because I could get into all the details, but so it wasn't until my freshman year of college that I learned that women can go to seminary. I had wanted, like, I had this quiet dream of wanting to do ministry and go to seminary for a long time, since like middle school, but like I said, women were not allowed, I guess, to be ministers or considered ministers. And so I didn't know that women could even go to seminary. And so my freshman year of college, I learned, oh yeah, you can go to seminary. Like, And I was like, what? And so from then on, it was just like, I just knew. It was one of those things I just knew, which there are very few things like that in my life that I just know that I'm going to do it. I just knew that was where I would end up at some point. And fast forward, my sophomore year of college, I transferred to a Christian Baptist liberal arts college in Tennessee and majored in religion with a missions emphasis. So that's a whole story in and of itself. But that's where I learned about Truett for the first time and learned the difference between various seminaries that affirm women in ministry and those that do not. And so, of course, I learned of Truett as one that does affirm women in ministry. And then, so by that point, it was just kind of assumed that seminary was the next thing, because you can't really do anything with an undergrad in religion. I mean, you can, but they tell you go to seminary, like this is a pre-seminary kind of degree. And so I was headed to 2 other seminaries before I ended up at Truett. That's a long story. I took 2 years out of school after college. And long story short, ended up in Waco, Texas. And when I first arrived, I was like, what? Because I'm from Mississippi, and then I went to school in Tennessee. Texas is just a whole other, I mean, it's its own country, y'all know. And so, yeah. So I wound up in Texas, and it took me 5 years to get my Master of Divinity, but I earned every one of those hours. Well, some of the hours I probably didn't earn very well, but I worked hard, and it was a hard 5 years, and here we are.
I am so thankful that you did wind up at seminary at Truett. That way we were able to connect, and now you're my covenant group leader. So that is an absolute joy. You mentioned working as a yoga instructor. So I would like to know how did that come about? How did you wind up becoming a yoga instructor? How has that provided encouragement in your life, and how can it encourage others?
Yeah. So a lot of people think that yoga is a religion. A lot of people think that you can't be Christian and practice yoga, and that is not true. And I am living proof of that. Yoga is a philosophy, and it is, it's when you really get to looking at some of the texts of the yoga tradition, they're not that much different than the Christian scriptures. And I mean, there are differences, but there are a lot of overlaps as well. But that's a side note. What was your question? How did I get into it? I had this vision while I was in seminary of myself as a counselor. And I specifically wanted to work with trauma survivors and overcoming their various experiences of trauma, because that was my experience as well. And then I had this vision of coupling counseling with yoga. And because I had been introduced to the yoga studio where I work now, and they had a survivor yoga, which was it was a program for trauma survivors. And then we have healing yoga, and I teach that now, and as well as other people. It's not just me, but and so yoga had become a very healing practice in my life. And so then I had this vision of coupling counseling and yoga. And so it was just kind of it was a no-brainer, but then it was partly like a whim. Like, yeah, I'm going to pay $3,000 to go get my yoga 200-hour certification. And I didn't really see myself teaching in a group setting. I didn't see myself teaching in even a studio setting. I wanted to do private one-on-one yoga, which I do some, but now I primarily teach group. Right now quarantine, we're just doing online, but outside of quarantine, I'm doing primarily group and some private yoga. But so I have witnessed how that the practice of yoga, particularly coupling the practice of yoga and the practice of following Jesus, how that has brought so much healing to me and to my own life, and then also to others. And so it's kind of my ministry right now. Like, I'm not at a church on staff every week. I do play piano for a church once a month, but and then I fill in for others. But so the yoga piece, and I specifically teach a class called Jesus and Yoga, that's kind of my ministry right now. And it's really cool because there are so many people who I get to encounter and reach out to who would never, ever step foot in a traditional church.
So how do you see yoga encouraging others, especially in a time where we're social distancing, we can't be with each other in person? There's a lot of, uncertainty, a lot of personal hardships that people are dealing with this pandemic. So how can yoga bring encouragement to others? And how do you think it can help us grow closer in our fellowship with God?
Yeah. So if the practice of yoga had a goal, which it doesn't, there are no goals in yoga, but if there was, the main goal of the practice would be to reduce suffering. And one of the 8 limbs of yoga, which is kind of the foundation or the pillars of the philosophy, one of those limbs, well, it's actually a sub-limb, is called ahimsa, which means non-harming. And so it is the practice of yoga that we seek to not harm ourselves in any way, and we seek to not harm others in any way. And that can be with words, with our thoughts, with our actions, or lack of actions, or any of those kinds of things. So the practice in and of itself is, like, I've been really amazed in this quarantine how relevant the practice of yoga is to what we've been experiencing. I've watched how so many people at our studio we've been doing online classes through Zoom, and so they just sign up for the class and get the link before class. And so many of them keep saying that these classes are their saving grace throughout this whole quarantine ordeal. And I think that's because of the power of the practice. It's not because we're anything magical or whatever. It's just our job is to bring the practice to others. And so I think the practice has such healing qualities in and of itself, whether that be the physical practice or the spiritual practice or the mental, emotional practice. It's all, so the practice of yoga encompasses the whole being, the whole purpose, the whole person, the body, mind, and spirit. And so what was your other question? How can we be encouraged?
So how can it, and I think you've answered it to some extent, but, how can it encourage others and how can it help us grow closer to God?
The quarantine or yoga?
Yoga.
Okay. Well, I think that, like I said a minute ago, there are so many parallels there's so many commonalities between the yogic texts and our Christian scriptures. It's really quite amazing how they seem to go together. And I think one way that it can encourage us spiritually, especially a way that not every thing can bring this aspect or whatever, but so there is this physical aspect of the yoga practice, what we call asana, or poses or postures, and so when that's the primary thing that brings people to the practice of yoga is the asana part. And so I think that in church today we forget about we neglect the physical body in our theologies and how we can embody spirituality. So we have these, as C.S. Lewis talks about, how we are spirit, or we are, the person, but we have a body. And I think we neglect that in our like, it's almost as if the body is a shameful thing. Like, we're not supposed to talk about certain things or whatever. And so I think that for me, the practice of yoga has helped me to embody my Christianity in a lot of ways, and to get it out. So a lot of times we like the head stuff, and we call it, the spiritual stuff. We like to love God with these invisible, with our doctrines and our beliefs, but God also gave us a body to take care of, and we've been told that it's a temple, and how often we neglect that. And so the practice of yoga reminds us that we have to live this life in this body, in this temple. So how are we going to take care of it well and make it the best possible dwelling for the Spirit of God? That's just one. There could be many, but that's just one that comes to my mind at the moment of yeah.
Very good. Well, I thank you for sharing your insights on how your passion can encourage others, especially when we're in a time of social distancing, a time when we're not able to be around each other. So it's wonderful hearing how different ways that we can stay connected and stay encouraged in the midst of all of this. Before we close, is there anything you would like viewers to be in prayer for?
I would say be in prayer for our world and our society, that for like the practice of yoga, as I said, is seeking to reduce suffering. And I think Jesus was about that too. And he was a healer. And there's just so much pain in our world. There's racism, there's division, there's political this and that, and there's fear right now of people and of this disease. And the social distancing can, while it's a safe practice, to keep, it's intended for us to not get sick and whatever, and that's a good thing, but it also can become isolating for some. And I know that people, like, I know some people who've been experiencing some really extreme loneliness because they're high risk or whatever, for whatever reason, they're just experiencing a lot of loneliness. So I guess my prayer request is very big. Like, we've got a lot of issues, people. and I think that that's not something that we get overwhelmed by, but it's something that we trust God with, the big stuff.
So would you like to close us in prayer over some of those things that you mentioned?
Yes, I would love to. Let us pray. God, you created this world and you created each person within it. And you created us and called creation good, and you called humanity very good. You love your handiwork, and we are your handiwork. And thank you, God, for that fact, that love. And I pray for our world now. There's so much pain and suffering. There's so much heartache, loneliness, fear, anxiety, and it runs the gamut. There's disease. There's fear of disease. There's always the fear of war in our world. There's fear of the other. There's fear of, people of color are afraid to go outside and leave their homes because it's not always safe for them, and there's racism, and God, there's just so many things that when we list them, it becomes really overwhelming. But we also know that you are our God, and you call us to trust you, to be still, to stop the fighting and cease the worrying, and just to know that you're God and that you've got this. And so we thank you for that. And we just pause for this moment to lay our burdens down, and our burdens for ourselves and our burdens for the world, just to rest them in your hands and to let them go from our minds and our hands. We loosen the grip on our need to control these things. And we ask for your spirit to come and invade and fill the empty places and the broken places. And we thank you for your presence. We ask to be quickened to that presence so that we may not miss you in our world. Amen.
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 Well,
Now I'm
thank you.
crying. Josh
Do
knows
what?
I cry all the time in covenant group.
I'm sorry, do what?
I said, now I'm crying. And then I said that you know that I cry all the time in covenant group.
Yes, but there's no shame in tears. So,
Yep. True.
so thank you for
Sure.
joining me in this. This has been amazing. It's been a pleasure, as always, getting to chat with you, Michelle. Thank you for your insights, for your prayer. And so I still have not found the best way to close these interviews. Sorry, viewers.
I've got it for you.
Okay.
I'm going to close it.
Sure.
Okay, so when we close the yoga class, we put our hand, I'm holding my phone, so I just have one hand. We put our hands in prayer position in our hearts, and then we say namaste one another. And namaste means, well, there are different translations, but my favorite is the divine in me sees and honors the divine in you. So we could close with namaste.
Sure.
Namaste, Josh, and everyone listening.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Michelle, for taking time out of your schedule to do this interview. To the viewers, I hope that this brought you some encouragement today. So now, may the peace of Christ be with you. May you have a marvelous day and stay awesome.